Hey guys, it's your girl KylieJ here and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is part 3 in my episode Drawing and Editing School series, and today I'm focusing on editing skin. I'll be using the apps Ibis Paint as well as Procreate because I use both of those when I do my editing. I typically split up the design between the two apps, but since I know that not all of you will have the Procreate app because it does cost some money, I'm going to try and show you as much as I can from Ibis Paint. And then the bit from Procreate will just be a little bit at the end, just because I have a lot of people who wonder how I do what I do on Procreate. So I have my iPad here, so I will start screen recording and I will begin the newest tutorial. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a new custom pose. The pose that I have been using of my character with the black top, I don't want to use it for this tutorial because this one is for shading skin and obviously that black top is a long sleeve. So I'm just going to speed through this really quick and I will be right back when I am done. So something important to keep in mind when you want to start editing the skin is to keep all of your layers separate. So as you can see in my new pose here, if you open up the selection with all the layers, you can see that all of my stuff is separate, except for one. We're going to delete that because that's always an empty layer when you import a picture. So I have a layer for the right arm. There is a layer for the base body of the character. There's also a layer for the right forearm, the right hand, and also the eyes. I'm not going to try and explain it now, but you will just see as I continue to go along here why it's important to keep them separate. So if this was the pose that I was going to make for myself or somebody else and I was ready to start editing the skin, I would start here and we'll just start at layer 1. I will add a new layer and I will turn on the clipping mask. And the clipping mask is something that I only recently learned about, but it is such a lifesaver when it comes to doing things like this. So basically when you turn on the clipping mask, you can only draw in the whatever is in the layer previously, whether it's this arm here or if there was a squiggle and you put a clipping mask on it, you could color only within that squiggle. So for example, just to show you what I mean, okay, so here's our brush, and remember that we selected this forearm here. So I'm over here drawing and you can't see anything, but now as I go across the arm you can see that, and that is what the clipping mask does. So I can color this whole thing in black. Yeah, and you can see down here, if I were to take off the clipping mask, there is that first scribble that I did. It still registers on the screen, but it doesn't show up until you would get rid of that clipping mask. Okay, so we're gonna start off with a new layer, and what I'm gonna do, oh, I just realized I never erased the white outline. Okay, I'm gonna do that really quick and then I'll be back. Back to what I was talking about. So we're gonna go to layer 2 here, which has the clipping mask over layer 1, which is this right forearm. And what we're gonna do is pick up the darker outline color of the character. Okay, so we're gonna go with this one. And I always go to the airbrush. I try and make it pretty big, and I also turn the opacity down. It kind of varies depending on what look I'm going for. So I'll just go like this, and I think it looks pretty good, so I'm not going to adjust it at all. Now, the only thing to keep in mind is, since this is a clipping mask, you might get harsh edges sometimes like this. So you just have to be careful of that. So I typically just go around the outside of the arm like this. I'll do a little bit on the inside as well. And then I'm gonna go around her top right here. So I'm making the circle a little bit smaller, and I'm turning the opacity up, or I guess I should say down a little bit more, just so it's a little bit darker and more concentrated, just as I go along her top here. And then you can tell right here, it just gives it a little bit more depth. So now I'm going to move to layer 4, which is the right forearm. I'm going to add a new layer and also put a clipping mask on this one. And I'm going to do the same exact thing, but I'm going to turn the opacity back down and make the brush a little bit bigger. And then I'm just going to go back and forth like this, just trying to get a nice blend on the arm. And the nice thing about the airbrush is it doesn't leave any harsh edges, so this is just really like subtle and soft. And again, I did cut the hand right here in this section, so I can't do this because then it looks pretty silly. We'll just do a little bit here. Now I'm going to move on to the hand, which is layer 6, make a new layer above it, clipping mask, and do the same thing that I've been doing. Okay, now for the hand, I'm going to try and smudge this a little bit, just to blend it together. And on the arm, on layer 4, I'm also going to smudge this a little bit, because I don't really like seeing such harsh lines on edited characters. So now we are going to go to the base body here, make a new layer, add the clipping mask, and I'll start down here with the legs. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we are doing this now on the body. So if you do it up here on the pants, the color's going on the pants. The nice thing about this being a clipping mask is you do this, you like how it's blended on the pants here, or the leg I mean, you can just erase it from the clipping mask, like this. And just smudge it down, and you still have that nice blend there, but it's like it never got on the pants. So it's really not that big of a deal. You know, if you were actually doing this on the character themselves, you would either have to undo the action you just did, or, well, that's really your only option, because there's no way to erase that without erasing the character themselves. I'm also going to do a little bit in between the legs here. I'm just lightly going over it. You really don't have to press that hard. You don't have to go that hard with it, because you still want it to look really natural. So I'm satisfied with how that looks, so I'm going to move up here to the stomach. and just do some shading around here and right under where the arm is. And again, I'm going to turn the opacity back down or up or whatever, and also make the brush size smaller. And I'm gonna run right under the arm like this, because in reality, this would be a lot darker than like down here, per se. And I'm gonna go back over this in a little bit with a slightly darker color, so I will get to that later. I'm just adding a little bit of a blur to it because it got a little harsh. Remember to make the brush bigger again, turn the opacity down. Now we are going to move on to the other arm here. And I'm going to put most of the shadow on this inside, just because it's kind of like behind the body a little bit. And I erased quite a bit of the outline, so I'm going to go a little bit harder right on the edge just to get it extra dark there. And you can see here I got some on the pants, so I'm just going to erase that. And now under the hand here, this would be really dark. This is just a lot of going back and forth with different brush sizes and different opacities as well to get the effect that you're looking for. And it's pretty fast. I like doing this, but it also does take time to make sure you're getting the colors in the right spots. And it also requires patience to make sure that you're getting the color in the right spots. It's very easy for this to become like really muddy or really dark looking, and that could be fine depending on the type of edit that you're going for. So now we're moving up to the face, and you have to add a little bit up here just so the rest of the body doesn't look too weird. So I'm just adding some back behind the neck, a tiny bit on the chest, and then just a little bit on the cheeks and around the forehead. And I'm going to smudge out these eyes. Just so it blends better in with the skin. And what I'm actually going to do is merge the eyes down onto the base layer. Alright, so this is where we're at now. I will go back in with a slightly darker color. I'm going to focus just on the real darkest parts, like right under here. Just a little bit on the stomach there, and then also under this hand, and a little bit behind the arms. I'm also going to add a little bit back here, and I'm going to add a little bit along the cheeks, but not too terribly much. I've really come to love using the smudge tool because it's really great for kind of bringing things together without it being too harsh. Like, it just smudges things nicely. Okay, the only other thing I'm really going to mess with here is smudging this because it just has that line that I don't like. Okay. Alright, so this is pretty much the shading done when it comes to editing the skin. So now I am going to add the highlights, and I'm also just going to put the highlights on new layers as well. I typically pull the highlight from the nose, just because that always seems to be the lightest part of the character, and depending on the look that I'm going for, I might make it just a tiny bit lighter. And I'm just going to use the same technique for highlighting as I just did with shading. So right now I'm on this forearm. So I'm going to make the brush pretty big. I'm going to turn the opacity down and just go right in the center. And there's that line that I was talking about. So I'm going to go right to the body here. And now it's gone again. I'm going to add a little bit on the stomach, some on the legs, the arms, a little bit on the hand, a little bit on the chest. And if you like to zoom really close to the screen like I do, it's really helpful to like back up and see how it's looking, because it looks different here than it does right here, at least to me. Okay, I don't like how it's looking right here. So let me see what I can do to fix this. I think it's looking pretty silly because of the episode shading right here. So I'm gonna see if I can get rid of it just a little bit. Alright, that softened it up a little bit so it's not quite so harsh. So this is where we're at now. This is just after some simple shading and highlighting on Ibis Paint. Another thing you can do to really step this up is to also shade the clothing as well. So for this, we're going to make another clipping layer for layer 4. So this will be now layer 7 that we're clipping on the body. We're going to go back to our airbrush. This time we're going to select the color black, and we're going to add some shading right here above the arm on the shirt. And this is also going to give it some more depth and make it look like the arm is actually in front of the shirt. You can also add some under the hair. And if you do get some on the hair, you can erase it because it is a clipping mask. And I'm also going to shade these shorts a little bit more. I'm going to use a slightly darker blue color. And I'm just going to do the very outside. And that is pretty much that for just basic shading and highlighting to edit an episode character. Now usually at this point I will save the image and then I will upload it to Procreate so that I can do the rest of my editing. So I guess I will go ahead and do that now. Now Procreate is the same way basically as Ibis Paint in regards to clipping layers. So if you click over here on these two little square things, you can click the plus sign to add a layer, click on the layer, click on clipping mask, and now you are at the same page as I showed you on Ibis Paint. So now I use Procreate for more of my heavier editing, and you certainly can do this stuff on Ibis Paint. I just haven't experimented with that too much because I use Procreate now. So the first thing that I'm going to show you guys that I typically do in my edits is how I add like a black shadow to my characters. And you can do this simply by putting a layer behind and adding black around them like this, and then using the Gaussian blur to blur it out. But what I like to do is to duplicate the entire character, alpha lock them, and color the whole thing black, or whatever color I want for the edit. I put my character back up here, I take off the alpha lock, and sometimes I go back and forth between the motion blur and the perspective blur. Again, just depends on what I'm going for. And I will do this, and then add a little bit of the Gaussian blur. And I think, to me, this gives it a nice shadow in the back. And you can certainly do this on Ibis Paint as well. You just have to look through the effects section. You know, the great thing about these apps is, like, you know, you can pretty much do the same thing on all of them. You just have to find the way to do it. So now that I've done that, I am going to add some highlights. And I kind of feel bad for doing this, but I don't use Procreate's brushes to draw my pictures. Most of the brushes that I have here are SW, and that is for Sandra Winther. And she has an Instagram, Sandra Winther Art. And oh my gosh, I aspire to be like her. So I bought like pretty much most of her brushes. And then I also have a couple brushes from Caroline from CK Art Design on Instagram. So I feel bad at doing this because the brushes that I'm going to show you how I do this with aren't going to be Procreate brushes. Rather, they're brushes that I bought. The first thing I'm going to do, I made a new layer, and I'm going to put it on Add. I'm going to go to my brushes, to my Sandra Skin brushes, and this highlight one here is my absolute favorite. It just makes the prettiest highlights. So I'm going to pick the color from her nose and add them to the face like this. It's literally just like the prettiest highlights ever. It's so sparkly and so me. So I just add some of these everywhere. On the lips sometimes, just to give it some sparkle. I try to be careful that I don't add too much, because I have a tendency to do that where I just kind of like go overboard and then it looks weird. Okay, so I think this looks pretty good. I'm also going to use Caroline's brushes, the overlay ones here. I really turn the opacity down for these, and I also turn the size down quite a bit because they are pretty big. And I just use those for a bit chunkier of a highlight. Okay, so I'm gonna add another layer and put this one on overlay. And I typically do this if I want to add like a little bit of a different color, like purple, for example. And then it just adds like a little bit of a different color in it. And depending on how harsh the highlight is, I will turn it down just a little bit. I think the last thing that I'm going to show you guys now is how I add like extreme highlights to the edges of my character. So let's say, for example, that there's a purple light source right here. What I'll do is add a new layer and do the whole clipping mask thing again. And I'll take one of these softer brushes. And on this layer, I'm also going to change the blend mode to add. And then I softly go over the skin like this, just right along the edge. And I'm only doing this in areas where it's actually like getting some of the light. And I just use some of Sandra's different brushes to get this done. I also add a little bit of it to the hair as well, but since this video is mostly focusing on just skin, I'm not gonna go too much into the hair. So this is basically the general idea of how I put the highlights down, and then I'm going to blend it out using another soft brush. Okay, and that is honestly pretty much that. And if you find that the colored highlights that you put in this layer are too bright, you can always turn down the opacity. That's the great thing about putting things in multiple layers, because you can change the opacity, you can change the blend mode, and really, I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but I got pretty good at this just by experimenting and honestly watching a lot of videos. I watch so many tutorials, and if you're really interested in doing, like, I don't want to call this extreme colors, but like extreme colors, I definitely recommend following Sandra on Instagram. I'll leave her handle down below because she uses such bold colors, she uses lots of blend modes and layers, and just produces like really amazing work. The things that she does in her videos, you can pull and apply it to yours, even within your editing. But this is basically what I do for a lot of my recent edits in regards to just the skin. Hair will be a separate video, eyes and other details will be a separate video, and then I will start working more on like drawing. And I'm going to continue to use Ibis Paint as much as I can for tutorials because, again, not everybody has Procreate and not everybody can or will buy it. I definitely think it's worth the money. Like, it's probably the best $10 I have ever spent, but it's definitely not necessary to do really great art. My phone battery is at like probably 2% by now, so I really need to wrap this up before it cuts me off. If you have any questions about anything that I've done in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll either answer it in the comments or I can answer it in my next tutorial. If there's anything else in particular you want to see that I may or may not have on my list, you can also let me know in the comments below as well. And do check out the description box below for some of the other videos in my editing and drawing school series in case there was something that you missed. And even if you don't have questions, just let me know what you thought of this video, if you enjoyed it, if it was easy to understand, and if you have any tips on how I can improve for my next video. Don't forget to share this video with your friends if you think they will find it helpful, and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed. And I think that is all I have for today's video. I hope that you found it helpful and learned something new. And stay tuned for more videos coming soon to my series. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see all of you beautiful faces next time. Bye.